In the heart of the Civil War, a daring gamble unfolded that would alter the course of history. As General Robert E. Lee prepared to confront Union forces at Gaines' Mill in 1862, the stakes were higher than ever. With the fate of the Confederacy hanging in the balance, Lee's audacious strategies clashed with the cautious maneuvers of Union General George B. McClellan. What began as a calculated risk soon spiraled into chaos, revealing not only the strengths and weaknesses of both armies, but also the human cost of war. This gripping narrative delves into the pivotal moments of a battle where courage met desperation and decisions made in the heat of conflict would echo through time. Join us as we unravel the shocking defeat of Union forces, a tale of ambition, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of victory that defines Robert E. Lee's legacy. Despite many weaknesses displayed by the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia during their first significant battle at Beaver Dam Creek and Mechanicsville on June 26, General Robert E. Lee's offensive strategies ultimately proved effective. The arrival of Stonewall Jackson, positioned northeast of Richmond, rendered the Federal forces north of the Chickahominy River unable to hold their ground. Unbeknownst to Lee, McClellan had already made the decision to abandon his vulnerable base at White House Landing in favor of a safer location south of the Chickahominy. As reports of Jackson's arrival reached McClellan's headquarters late on the night of June 26, he understood that he needed to take immediate action. Otherwise, Porter's V Corps would be overwhelmed and face destruction. In an effort to roll out an offensive on either side of the river, McClellan faced criticism from his subordinates, who urged him to capitalize on Porter's recent victory at Beaver Dam Creek. However, imagining overwhelming enemy forces wherever he looked, Major General McClellan ultimately chose to abandon his offensive plans and retreat, not back down the Virginia Peninsula as he had originally come, but instead due south toward the nearest safe haven, which was the James River. General McClellan referred to this retreat as a change of base that would save his Army of the Potomac from certain annihilation. Brigadier General Porter received orders to fall back to a new defensive position near Gaines' Mill that would cover the river crossings and help hold off the Confederates. Although McClellan was already facing defeat, his army still had plenty of fight left in it. At 3 a.m. on June 27th, Brigadier General George A. McCall, whose 3 infantry brigades from his Pennsylvania Reserve Division had fought valiantly and won at Mechanicsville, received orders to withdraw from the Beaver Dam Creek line. Rear guards supported by artillery screened this movement, holding the creek crossings until after sunrise, when rebel skirmishers advanced as soon as it was light enough to see clearly. Except for 2 companies of the 13th Pennsylvania Reserves who did not receive the order in time and were subsequently captured by Confederate forces, all Union men and their guns successfully completed a 3-mile withdrawal to a new position beyond Bosun's Creek, which is also referred to as a swampy area. Generals wanted peace of mind, knowing that their men would be protected while they rested during the night. Shifting brigades to allow fresh troops to launch an attack at dawn, Lee arrives in Mechanicsville with determination to accomplish everything on June 27th that was left unfinished on June 26th. As it becomes clear that the enemy is retreating, Lee instructs A.P. Hill to push his light division across Beaver Dam Creek. The Confederate commander also orders Major Generals Magruder and Uzzi to defend the Richmond works at all costs, if necessary, with bayonets. One of Lee's first actions that morning is sending an aide to guide Jackson south from Hundley's Corner to join the main Confederate forces. Lee meets Jackson and A.P. Hill at 10 a.m. to discuss a plan for surrounding the enemy. Jackson is tasked with marching northeast on Cold Harbor Road, crossing the headwaters of Point Creek to reach Old Cold Harbor, where he will meet D.H. Hill, who is already moving south on an alternate route. Once united, D.H. Hill and Jackson will command 14 of the Army's 26 infantry brigades. On the Confederate right, Major General Longstreet will advance his division along the River Road, overlooking the Chickahominy River, to support A.P. Hill's advance toward Point Creek and Gaines' Mill. Unlike the previous day, A.P. Hill has clear orders to engage the Federals wherever they are found. he positions Brigadier General Maxcy Gregg's brigade of well-rested South Carolinians, which had been held in reserve the day before, at the front of his light division. By mid-morning, Brigadier General Porter has his reinforced V Corps positioned on a plateau behind Bosun's Creek, forming a horseshoe-shaped defensive position of significant natural strength. This oval-shaped plateau is approximately 2 miles wide and 1 mile deep, with its long outer side facing north. The Watt, McGehee, and Adams families each have homes on this plateau, and the cleared land around these structures provides excellent fields of fire for defenders. The highest point is known locally as Turkey Hill. However, the day's battle would take its name from a site a mile away, the home and garrison of Dr. William Gaines, the area's largest landowner who is known for supporting the rebellion. Union troops had camped on his land for several months and had buried many fever-stricken dead there despite his protests. Gaines defiantly declared he would dig up the bodies and feed them to his hogs once the Yankees were driven away. Rising at the northeast corner of the plateau and curving around its northern and western sides before emptying into the Chickahominy River, Bosun's Creek is a sluggish stream with heavily overgrown banks and bottomlands filled with trees and underbrush. The ground to the north and west is largely open farmland that slopes down to swampy lowlands. Porter arranges his corps in a crescent-shaped line nearly 2 miles long, facing north and west. Brigadier General George W. Morrell's 1st Division secures the left flank on Turkey Hill, while Brigadier General George Sykes' 2nd Division of mostly U.S. Army regulars holds the right flank. Morrell's position is nearly impregnable. The Union forces are stationed in a first line along the eastern edge of the bottomland and in a second line halfway up the hillside. McCall's Pennsylvania Reserve Division is deployed as a third line along the crest of the plateau as a reserve force. 2 companies from Colonel Hiram Bourdain's 1st U.S. Sharpshooters are positioned in this first line. The infantrymen in all 3 lines take cover behind hastily constructed earthworks made from logs, fence rails, and dirt. Porter believes he does not have enough strength to extend his line back to the Chickahominy River on his right side. Therefore, he relies on the boggy terrain there to deter any turning movements by enemy forces. Porter commands 96 guns to support his infantry positions. These guns are placed along the third line of defenses or held in reserve on the plateau itself. Adding more firepower are 3 batteries of long-range artillery positioned on the south bank of the Chickahominy River that can assist Morrell's division. Brigadier General Philip St. George Cooke places 4 companies from the 5th U.S. Cavalry Regiment under Captain Charles J. Whiting on the far left flank, covering ground between Morrell's division and the river. As A.P. Hill's Light Division advances toward the enemy picket line beyond Powhatan Creek, contact occurs 3 miles away, completely unknown to General Lee, after D.H. Hill's division arrives at Old Cold Harbor ahead of Jackson's forces. Old Cold Harbor is simply an unremarkable crossroads hamlet. New Cold Harbor is located 1.5 miles to the west. When D.H. Hill advances Garland's brigade and G.B. Anderson's brigade down the road toward the Chickahominy River from Old Cold Harbor, his skirmishers encounter sharp musket fire from behind a stream ahead and artillery fire from the slope beyond. Captain J.W. Bondurant's Alabama Battery of the Jeff Davis Artillery is rushed forward to suppress this fire, but faces severe bombardment from Union riflemen on high ground to the east, manned by U.S. Army regulars from Sykes' 2nd Division, forcing a quick withdrawal. Hill realizes he is encountering heavier resistance than anticipated and seems to be facing the enemy's front rather than his flank. The stream where Union infantry are sheltered is not marked on Hill's map, prompting him to wisely decide to wait for Jackson's arrival. This engagement occurs shortly after noon, but Lee remains unaware of it or the enemy's position. Typically, artillery sounds at that distance would be audible, but on this hot, humid day, acoustic shadows muffle the noise of battle due to heavy pockets of dense, moist air scattered across the field. In their first action of the war, Maxcy Gregg and his men pushed down Telegraph Road, reaching Hawaii Creek at Gaines Mill around noon. Expecting a fight there, Gregg's brigade encounters only sporadic fire and continues across the creek to New Cold Harbor, moving quickly down a slope toward a wooded area bordering another swampy body of water. The Battle of Gaines Mill, also referred to in some northern accounts as the Battle of Chickahominy River, erupts in earnest around 2:30 p.m. on Friday, June 27, 1862. From across the swamp comes intense musket fire joined by shells and solid shots from Union artillery on high ground, halting Gregg's brigade and driving his troops back in confusion. After rallying his regiments, Gregg reports back to A.P. Hill that he has made contact with the enemy. Hill and Lee ride up to assess the situation. Lee quickly realizes that the Federals have established their position not behind Hawaii Creek, as he expected, but in a much stronger position behind a creek that does not appear on his maps. Furthermore, the enemy is facing both north and west and appears to be in significant force. Believing that Jackson and D.H. Hill will soon reinforce the fight, Lee instructs Gregg to hold his position until the rest of the division arrives to renew the assault. Once Brigadier Generals Lawrence O'Brien Branch, Dorsey Pender, Joseph R. Anderson, Charles Field, and James Archer form up on Gregg's right, the Confederate battle line stretches nearly a mile long. Once again, however, the attackers fail to concentrate their artillery for effective fire support, leading both gunners and infantrymen to suffer as a result. Most of A.P. Hill's men will need to cross at least a quarter mile of open ground before reaching Bosun's Creek. From his command post at the Watt House on Turkey Hill, Porter observes Hill's brigades deploying for battle and rising dust clouds off to his left along the river road. He signals Army headquarters for reinforcements. Brigadier General Henry W. Slocum's military. McClellan, coordinating his army's efforts by a telegraph from his headquarters at the Trent House south of the river and not personally directing any of the fighting, relays a request to 6th Corps' headquarters. As a result, Slocum's division crosses the river at Alexander's Bridge. At 2:30 p.m., Major General A.P. Hill orders his 12,000-man division to advance. Brigadier General George Morrell's 1st Division has about 1,000 fewer men than A.P. Hill's forces. But with part of Sykes's 2nd Division also engaged, the defenders hold a slight numerical advantage. They possess a significant edge in artillery as well, with 3 batteries, Battery A of the 2nd U.S. Artillery, Battery Y of the 5th U.S. Artillery, and the combined guns of Batteries L and M of the 3rd U.S. Artillery, positioned on the large slopes of Fort Hill in addition to those tightly packed on the crest. The Confederate gunners struggle to make an impact against this formidable array. When Captain D.G. McIntosh's South Carolina battery from the P.D. Artillery arrives on the field, dust and smoke obscure the swamp and surrounding hills, making it impossible for McIntosh to distinguish friend from foe, leading him to cease firing after just 3 rounds. The attackers from Gregg's brigade managed to force an enlargement in the center of the Union line, where Morrell and Sykes's divisions meet, soon finding themselves engaged in fierce combat. Colonel John F. Marshall's 1st South Carolina Rifles Regiment charges with fixed bayonets against batteries L and M of the 3rd U.S. Artillery, clashing with its supporting infantry units. Jury Zueves, the 5th New York, and Colonel Gouverneur K. Warren's 3rd Brigade. After intense hand-to-hand fighting, they are forced back with a loss of 309 men killed or wounded. The remainder of Gregg's brigade fares slightly better. However, Branch's brigade, like Gregg's, hadn't seen action the day before and suffers heavily during the 2-hour assault, losing 401 men in total. Bourdain's sharpshooters contribute significantly to this heavy toll. Deployed as skirmishers, they move from tree to tree along the eastern edge of the swamp, feeding cartridges into their breech-loading rifles and firing from distances as short as 40 yards. None of Hill's brigades, except for Gregg's, gain any ground beyond Poston's Creek. J.R. Anderson's brigade launches 3 spirited but ultimately unsuccessful charges, while Fields's brigade becomes so tangled in the swampy undergrowth that its 2nd line inadvertently fires upon its own men in front, forcing Colonel Robert M. Mayo of the 47th Virginia to order his troops to fall flat to avoid friendly fire coming from both front and back. In just 2 hours, A.P. Hill's men's casualties while fighting without support. Around this time, Captain William Biddle from General McClellan's staff arrives at Turkey Hill and finds Brigadier General Porter calmly sitting atop his horse behind a strip of woods overlooking the Union left flank, while a tide of wounded men streams past and shells explode all around him. A staff officer asks Porter if he has where holding them, but it's getting hotter by the minute. At that moment, the vanguard of McClellan's 1st Division of 6th Corps arrives from the river crossing, boosting Porter's numbers to 36,400. He rides off to integrate these reinforcements into the line. Meanwhile, Stonewall Jackson is struggling to position his forces where Lee needs them. After meeting with Lee that morning, he has obtained a guide, but fails to provide precise directions for reaching Old Cold Harbor. The guide takes the shortest route, which leads past Gaines' Mill. When Jackson realizes he is not arriving on the enemy's right flank as intended, he orders a countermarch back to Cold Harbor Road, delaying the arrival of his Valley force by almost 2 hours. Major General Richard S. Ewell, leading Jackson's advance, is the first to reach Old Cold Harbor, where he finds Lee's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Walter Taylor, anxiously waiting for him. Concerned that Porter might launch a counterattack against A.P. Hill's battered division, Lee had sent Taylor to find any of Jackson's units and get them into battle as quickly as possible. At the same time, Lee instructs Major General Longstreet on the right to create at least a diversion in support of A.P. Hill. It is nearly 4 p.m. when Lee meets Ewell on Telegraph Road and orders him to attack with his 3 brigades against the Union center, where Gregg and Branch have been pushed back. Lee also sends one of Ewell's aides to locate the rest of Jackson's command and bring them to the field. Ewell sends in his lead brigade, the Louisiana Tigers, now commanded by Colonel Isaac G. Seymour of the 6th Louisiana, in the absence of the recently promoted Richard Taylor. Without waiting for the rest of his division, Seymour forms the Louisiana Brigade into a line of battle with the 6th Louisiana on the extreme right and the 9th Louisiana on the far left, while the 1st Louisiana Special Battalion and the 7th and 8th Louisiana form the brigade center. The Tigers advance under heavy musket fire from John Martindale's 1st Brigade in Morrell's division. During this assault, Colonel Seymour is killed while leading his men into battle. Confusion quickly sets in among his troops in the boggy thickets near the creek. Command devolves to Major Robert O. Wheat, renowned commander of the 1st Louisiana Special Battalion, who is mortally wounded while leading an assault with his battalion. The Tigers waver and then flee toward the rear. Ewell's next brigade under Brigadier General Isaac Tremble attacks piecemeal with just 2 regiments, the 15th Alabama and 21st Georgia. "Boys, you are mighty good, but that's hell in there," warns a retreating Louisiana soldier as both regiments charge into murderous rifle and cannon fire without hesitation. Neither regiment can advance beyond the western edge of the bottom land. The Union line holds against these repeated attacks, but suffers losses with each assault. Since their midday skirmish near Gaines' Mill, the Irishmen of the 9th Massachusetts have repelled consecutive attacks from Branch, Pender, and Tremble, and are now out of ammunition. Nearby Zouaves from the 5th New York have lost a third of their number through successive charges and countercharges and are sent to the rear for rest and resupply. As Porter moves units from McCall's Pennsylvania Reserves Division into the hardest-hit areas of his line, the 9th Pennsylvania Reserves advance with fixed bayonets to relieve the exhausted 9th Massachusetts. "We chased them across a field into some woods," wrote Corporal Adam Bryant of his regiment, "but then they got reinforcements and we had to fall back. We reformed our lines 3 times and charged them but could not drive them out of those woods." More troops from Slocum's division arrive at this point and are inserted into McCall's lines where they are most needed. Confederate President Jefferson Davis observes from high ground 1 mile behind the front, but can see little through the tangled bottom land. On the extreme Confederate right flank, Longstreet orders Brigadier General George E. Pickett's brigade of 2,000 men to attack Union positions behind Bosun's Creek to assist A.P. Hill's hard-pressed division. The Virginians march downhill and disappear into thickets near the water's edge, while concentrated artillery fire from Turkey Hill and along the south bank of Chickahominy rains down on Pickett's men. During this attack from 4 to 4:30 p.m., Brigadier General Pickett is wounded, shot off his horse while leading his men forward, but continues moving ahead while leading his horse on foot. A second assault by Pickett's brigade is led by Colonel Eppa Hunton of the 8th Virginia. Hunton's regiment is the only one in Pickett's brigade that succeeds in breaking through Union lines across Bosun's Creek. However, this breakthrough goes unexploited, as no further ground is gained in Hunton's sector. Longstreet learns from a walking wounded soldier about their failure during the attack. Old Pete quickly realizes that it would require an entire army attacking together to dislodge the enemy from their position on Turkey Hill. Although A.P. Hill's, Ewell's, and Longstreet's attacks have been repulsed so far, Porter grows more anxious by each passing minute. By 5 p.m., his men are exhausted, dehydrated, low on ammunition, and their weapons are fouled. "I am pressed hard, very hard," he informs headquarters. "About every regiment I have has been in action, and unless reinforced, I am afraid I shall be driven from my position." Having made no contingency plans for such a situation, McClellan sends no immediate reinforcements, but merely asks his subordinates if they have any troops to spare. Eventually, he dispatches 2 brigades from Brigadier General Edwin Sumner's 2nd Corps, but due to their location, it will take almost 3 hours for them to arrive. Meanwhile, Jackson finally reaches Old Cold Harbor and becomes aware of the situation and the enemy's positions. He begins to get his remaining forces into action, specifically the divisions of Brigadier Generals William H.T. Whiting and Charles Winder. At this point, these divisions stretch for several miles along Cold Harbor Road. Rather than sending his ailing chief of staff, Major Robert Dabney, to guide these units into position, Jackson gives hurried and complicated verbal orders to another aide, his quartermaster, Major John Harmon. The 2 fresh divisions are instructed to move into line in echelon between D.H. Hill and U.L. If that fails, they should move toward the sound of the heaviest firing. Lacking tactical knowledge, Harmon becomes hopelessly confused when relaying Jackson's instructions to Whiting and Winder, leaving the puzzled general stationary for another precious hour. As the roar of gunfire intensifies across the fronts, Major Dabney realizes what has transpired and rides over to convey the correct orders. One after another, 6 more Confederate brigades finally begin moving into line. Some brigades have 2 miles to march and encounter further confusion as they near the front. However, with daylight fading, a sense of urgency overrides everything else. After a brief meeting with Lee on Telegraph Road, Jackson rides back to his units and dispatches couriers to his 2 division commanders. "Tell them this affair must hang in suspense no longer," Jackson insists. "Sweep the field with the bayonet. Getting these scattered units into position in the woods and marshes is a painfully slow process. Consequently, 2 of Winder's brigades end up in reserve behind Longstreet's division a mile away from the rest of Winder's men. Whiting commands the brigades of John Bell Hood and Colonel Evander Law. As he marches these 2 brigades toward the sound of heavy firing, Whiting allows them to drift to the right. They go into action on Longstreet's left, under that officer's direction. It is almost 7 p.m. The setting sun appears dull red through the haze of smoke and dust. With A.P. Hill's Light Division and part of Ewell's division too exhausted for further combat, and one of Longstreet's brigades allocated to reserve, Lee deploys 16 brigades totaling 32,100 men for the final attack. The battle line stretches in a great arc for 2 miles. On the right, soldiers face east. On the left, they face south. With McCall's and Slocum's divisions fully engaged, Porter's strength is approximately 34,000 men. However, many in Morrell's and Sykes's frontline divisions are worn out from hours of heavy fighting. Moreover, several regiments from McCall's and Slocum's forces have been hastily put into line, likely leading to significant confusion as the attack progresses. When Lee orders his entire line forward, the climax of the battle at Gaines' Mill devolves into a chaotic melee. D.H. Hill faces a daunting task on the Confederate left. The slope to the crest of the hill is 400 yards long and entirely open, while Federals have placed a battery near the McGee House to contest any advance with devastating fire. D.H. Hill's division quickly becomes entangled in swampy terrain as they emerge from woods and marshes, piled one behind another. Two regiments, the 2nd and 4th North Carolina, suffer heavy casualties in a futile attempt to seize the battery's guns. Struggling toward the hill's crest, D.H. Hill's division engages in savage fighting with Sykes's regulars in an orchard near McGee House that turns into a bloody battlefield. Every post bush and tree now covers a man blazing away as fast as he can, wrote Sergeant Thomas Evans of the 12th U.S. Infantry Regiment. Calm after calm of the enemy melts away like snow, but is quickly reformed and again rushes on. Successive waves of Confederates rush toward the Union line. Brigadier General Alexander Lawton's brigade of 3,600 men eagerly advances into their first fight against the Union center. The Stonewall Brigade from Winder's division pushes into line on Lawton's left next to D.H. Hill, while being joined by a fresh brigade from Trimble's reformed brigade in Ewell's division. On the Confederate right flank, Longstreet's division faces difficult terrain along with heavy cannon fire as they attack. His men must cross nearly a quarter-mile of open ground before reaching swampy terrain and enemy fortifications. "Up to the crest of the hill we went at double quick," wrote Corporal Edmund Patterson of the 9th Alabama. "But when we came into view on top of the ridge, we met such a perfect storm of lead right in our faces that our whole brigade staggered backward several paces as though pushed by a tornado." Whiting's 2-brigade division numbers fewer than 8,000 men and constitutes what amounts to Longstreet's left wing during this assault. Hood's Texas Brigade consists of the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas Regiments, the 18th Georgia, and Hampton's South Carolina Legion. After seeing the strong defense from well-placed Union soldiers, Whiting understands that for their attack to work effectively, Lawton's and Hood's brigades must move forward quickly without stopping to fire. They need to cross the open ground through the swamp as fast as they can while staying organized and break through the Union line. As Hood lines up his 5 regiments on Lawton's left side, he notices a gap between Law and Longstreet, so he sends the 4th Texas into that opening. For reasons unknown, several companies from the 18th Georgia also decide to join the 4th Texas. Because of this situation, Hood sends his Texas Brigade forward on both sides of Law's brigade. Ignoring Colonel John Marshall's command of the 4th Texas, Hood takes charge of his old regiment. Marshall is killed just minutes after they begin their advance. With Hood leading on foot, more than 500 men from the 4th Texas and 18th Georgia step off together. The field ahead is filled with fallen comrades, destroyed artillery pieces, injured horses, and broken supply wagons. Law's and Longstreet's men keep pace with them, holding their fire and trying to stay as quiet as possible. The Battle of Gaines' Mill stands as one of the most dramatic engagements of the Civil War, a brutal contest where Robert E. Lee's boldness overcame the Union's formidable defenses. While the Confederates paid a terrible price in blood, their victory marked a turning point in the Peninsula Campaign, forcing McClellan to abandon his advance on Richmond. This clash revealed the essential character of both commanders: Lee's willingness to take shocking risks and McClellan's tendency toward caution even when holding strong positions. Most importantly, it demonstrated the horrifying human cost of Civil War combat, with nearly 15,000 men falling in a single day's fighting. As the smoke cleared over Gaines's Mill, one truth became undeniable: the war would be longer, bloodier, and more brutal than anyone had imagined. The road ahead would demand ever greater sacrifices from North and South alike. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to Rootvolutionary for more untold stories from history's most pivotal moments. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop new content. We've got more gripping Civil War battles and revolutionary moments coming your way. If you found this account compelling, let us know in the comments which other pivotal battles you'd like us to cover next. And don't forget to like and share this with fellow history enthusiasts. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay revolutionary.